is Andrea and Darryl, and we are giving you a perspective with regards to a philosophy theory that we've been working on and discussing. It's basically Mill's theory of utilitarianism and consequentialism. And basically what we've been looking at is that this philosopher had the theory of basically saying that human beings exist for happiness, and that what we do is that we live to experience our desires, and that what he said was the goodness of man is basically our desire to experience happiness. And through that he created a individual morality which is existent on the basis of, if man exists to experience happiness as opposed to experiencing pain and suffering, then that is our goodness, and that we will create actions and motivate ourselves to experience our happiness, and that becomes then our actions, which are based in right and wrong, and that the wrong actions will result in us experiencing discomfort and pain, and that right actions will result in us getting the ultimate happiness. And therefore he says that what he was saying then was that how a person can decide what is right or wrong is through the theory of consequentialism. So basically looking at what is the consequence of my actions. Will I experience happiness and pleasure? Will I get to live out my desires? Or will I experience the opposite? So he said that people can use that as a system of reference to go, okay, what actions do I take now so that I can get the end result as the consequence? And then he also had a very interesting point with regards to, if each person wants to experience individual happiness, then there must exist a thing called general happiness. So his next theory that he had was the general happiness theory, something like that. And in this he said that, okay, for us to experience happiness for all, what would have to be done for everybody to experience their specific type of happiness, which will obviously be different from person to person. Now, there he brought in the concept of self-interest as individual happiness being placed aside by the individual to consider what it would mean for all to be happy. And we wanted to do a vlog about this because we want to, other than the overview we've given you now, we would like to share our perspective with regards to this specific philosophy, because this is exactly what the world system is basing everything we do right now is, first of all, individual happiness. So it's self-interest that we all exist in. What can I do this lifetime to experience my happiness?
John Stuart Mill, of course, was a 19th century British philosopher who was an exponent or proponent of utilitarianism, which is a very liberal social theory. Basically, he said his measurement of ethical behavior would be doing something or having actions that would amount to the greatest amount of good to the greatest amount of people. It's still rooted in individuality. It's still rooted in self-gratification as a starting point for behavior. And the pleasure principle states that man is hardwired to seek pleasure and avoid pain. John Stuart Mill, of course, was a proponent of liberalism and utilitarianism. And liberalism is the great social theory that man should be free to do what he wants without, undue restrictions from society. Sounds good on the surface. I mean, man should be able to do what he wants, but this is usually carried over to the liberty of harassing others and taking advantage of people who can't help themselves. in the form of economics, primarily, and in the form of might makes right. Um, we have constructed laws and social forces that actually are committed in the name of liberty, but actually robs us of our liberty because if you take capitalism, for example, we are forced to participate in it, whether we like it or not. And if we don't like it, we starve.
Yeah.
So there's really not a liberty basis for a lot of the economic structures that we exist in. I mean, what we want is a true liberal, true liberty-based economic system. And with utilitarianism, which is like a version of liberalism, which promotes the right to make as much money as possible at the expense of, no matter how it affects somebody else. I mean, it's like the Walmart situation where a $5 bag of underwear is produced in slave labor conditions. I mean, we must have the liberty to be able to do that.
What is happening in the world now, if you look at where philosophy tends to mix with reality, and people then will philosophize about the current situation of reality by saying, oh, it is the best way for us to live. An example of that is where you look at the utilitarian philosophy in society, is where Darryl made me aware of a situation that happened with the president's friend, or the president that got busted.
Well, we were talking about for those ancient history fans from the history of the 1980s, 1990s, the Iran-Contra affair, where one of the henchmen were pulled in front of Congress to explain why he lied to Congress and the American people, and he justified it as the lesser of two evils, which is what is basically a utilitarian justification of doing something that may be morally questionable in other terms or other definitions of morality, but justifiable because somebody has worked out an equation for themselves that X, Y, and Z is preferable, even though it will harm a bunch of people, because in my conception, I'll be doing a greater good because there's an end result that I want to achieve. So I will do maybe a immoral thing to justify it by its outcome.
Selecting the consequences which appear to be most preferable, because in the end they will still produce a certain amount of happiness or a desirable outcome for one person or a few people. And what is happening, as I mentioned just now, people are using philosophy and attempting to mix it with the current state of reality, is that people are looking at, okay, this is the consequence, there is a consequence, we are going to take the one that causes the least amount of stress and tension, and in the end doesn't hurt too many people, or has a consequence which to some people might seem morally incorrect or wrong. But if you actually look at what's behind it, we're actually supporting the economy, and we're making sure that the country is safe and stuff like that. Now, those options as consequences that people are using to justify why we get away with what we do in the system is basically to protect the world system and the money system the way it is. So by looking at what is best for all, these people will always use what is best for all, meaning supporting the system as it is. Nobody is willing to look at what is best for all, meaning the ultimate degree of what requires to do and to be done for us to stop the current abuse that is being allowed in the name of the money system. People will always say, okay, we're going to protect the system as it is, so gee, do you want me to do this or do you want me to do this, to protect the system as it is? That's not doing what is best for all. That's not observing oh gee, if I do this and this, then my consequences are ultimately the suffering of mankind. That is what one should be looking at. Doing the best for all means not just protecting the system the way it is, because, people who will protect the presidents and the governments and the existing economy and the way that the world functions, what you are doing is, if you accept what you're being told through the media, you are keeping the system of abuse going. So for us to step outside of what we've already accepted and allowed, we have to really look at the ultimate sacrifice of humanity, and what has to change about the existing system the way it is for us to bring about a system of equality. So, one could almost, if you look at the way that the world exists now as a closed off system, and you look at what is beyond that as really what is best for all, equality, equal rights, equal money, all of those things are very doable. The system as it exists now, everything is in place already for an equal money system. The hospitals,
global financing,
everything is in place. All the infrastructure.
Very much a global village now.
Yeah.
The problem is that people equate equality as a threatening thing against liberty and freedom, because now, hey, equality says you can't do this and that to enrich or aggrandize yourself at the expense of another. You have to be at least acting like a human being towards another, and not just treat them as personal slave or something just to exploit. So John Stuart Mill, as far as I know, he didn't really speak much about equality. He spoke much more about individualism and liberty as the ultimate philosophical point he wanted to take on.
Yeah, and I mean, even back then, if you look at what they equated as, let's say, personal happiness, that each person desires to be happy, they were talking about the basic things like good food, entertainment, listening to good music, enjoying the sensations of the physical, sex, stuff like that. So when they spoke about happiness for all, they were talking about this world where everybody can run around and be, like free and express and have sex and eat food and listen to good music and go to plays and operas. And today's time, if you look at that, that's why, Destiny, we say evolution does not exist, because we're back in that time when everybody just wants to experience their desires. It's still the exact same thing now. And the person like you and me who are participating in keeping the system going, we're using the exact same justification of, it's okay, the politicians and the people who are taking us for a ride, they can feed me whatever they want to through the media, because, man, I have free will to go to the shop and buy what food I want, or to go to a movie, or to go clubbing and take drugs and entertain myself in sex. And I'm going to say that this really is freedom of choice. This is what it's all about. And in the end of the day, therefore, one has to look at what is your expression even? What is happiness? One has to ask yourself the self-honest questions of, if we were to even look at, okay, what would be happiness for all? What is honest self-expression within all of that? Because if we all just went and created a system so we can all be happy, that's exactly what we're all trying to do now, a system of self-interest based on desires, which again, at the end of the day, somebody will be at the receiving end of having to pay for the rest of us trying to live out our desires. So we would have to, in an equal money system, for example, really look at not just everybody gets everything equally. We would have to look at an absolute level of self-responsibility.